thank you again for the distinguished speakers and panelists, which I will introduce shortly. Just a few words before we move to the opening remarks. I think it's really an excellent signal that we have this event that was organized by Transparency International on the last day. We had a number of events related to different aspects of corruption, economic crime, but as well as on the more positive aspects of things, different bits of financial integrity, accountability, and integrity measures. And we have seen each other quite a bit along these 4 days, and I think this is really important. At the policy level, also from the perspective of someone who is in New York, it's really interesting to see the trajectory of where we stand now with this outcome document. Many may have already forgotten that we had already a very interesting and strong commitments from the member states of the UN in the Pact for the Future, in Action 4, precisely on these topics. And eventually, what has been committed by member states in the outcome document of FfD 4 and the Sevilla Compromiso is really just a consistent follow-up with the Pact for the Future. So we know that we always have these multilateral processes, and it's great that in this regard, the signal is consistent on the political messaging. So one last thing I would like to mention, because of course, as you know, UNODC is the guardian of the UN Convention Against Corruption, the UNCAC, is that it comes at an important time, a few months before the next conference of the state parties to the convention. And we presented yesterday 3 initiatives, and we'll be more than happy to address them again, including one on professional enablers, which will be discussed, I'm sure, during the Q&A, and for which, again, some of the countries and partners in the room have decided to respond. So without further ado, I will now hand over the floor to Ms. Toril Even-Pedersen, Assistant Director and Head of Section for Governance and Transparency at NORAD, also in longer words, Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation. Thank you very much, Tori.
Thank you very much. And I'm very pleased to be here in a very packed room. This is impressive. It's been a really interesting few days. And I'm really happy about both the fact that we had an outcome document before we started this event. Means that a lot of the side events and sidebar discussions have been able to focus on, where do we go and how do we implement, rather on what do we agree and disagree on, and the nitty-gritties. So from the government of Norway, we've been engaged and committed to the financing for development process for years, and with this particular focus on public resources and public finance. And for us, financing for development is primarily a governance reform about mobilizing resources from all available sources to be implemented in countries to deliver healthcare, education, water infrastructure, and everything else that is needed to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals. And we've been proud to serve as co-facilitators of the process, which has given us a lot of opportunities, but also some restrictions. As co-facilitators, we're not actively involved in the negotiation with our own positions, but because we have a very vast and good network of partners, we've been able to engage, and a lot of the partners here in this room have been able to be mobilized and have discussions and have contributed directly, even if we haven't had a voice as a government position. But we did do our own assessment of the Addis Ababa Action Agenda last summer, and we did put forward also our own national contributions to the Elements papers. And our assessment was that the coverage of anti-corruption was insufficient in the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, which it left a lot of room for leakages or inaction on leakages and misuse. And we know corruption disproportionately harms the poorest and most vulnerable. It raises costs and limits access to essential services and worsens inequality. It distorts public investment, leads to bad infrastructure investments, and it undermines safety and environmental standards. So scarce resources must not be lost to inefficient mismanagement or corruption. Transparency, accountability, and effectiveness of use of public finance must be at the heart of national development strategies, and it must also be reflected in the international processes and documents. We know also from the process that there has been some effort in the process to remove mentions and reflections of anti-corruption as a cross-cutting issue, although the majority of countries have expressed support for this. And now that it's there, it is on us to use that work that we all have put in to make sure it's there as a cross-cutting issue, that it becomes an actionable part of the agenda and not just a cross-cutting issue. On the actionable part, there are a lot of very specific references that I think we can use. It recognizes anti-corruption as a driver for public sector integrity, trust institutions, reduced inequality, improved domestic resource allocation, and also increased private investment and growth. It advances and specifically references the UN Convention against Corruption, which we think is important. It's very important that we're building on processes that are already established and that we're bringing it together under this new framework and agreement. It has commitments to ensure transparency and accountability in public financial management. It furthermore commits to scale up technical assistance and exchange of best practices, and a range of other very specific mentions. I think we've also seen in a lot of the other specific areas, such as tax area, that the integrity part and thus also the corruption part has been much stronger reference. So now we have these commitments and we have to implement. Norway will continue to be a financial contributor to the UN process on anti-corruption, but also civil society and other interest groups that work specifically on anti-corruption and other forms of accountability mechanisms, whether it is from the multilateral side, from the civil society side, or even from the journalist side. It is an ecosystem of stakeholders that is going to take us forward, both at the national level and at the international level. So the SPAs were also mentioned by Jonathan, and I think although I know there is some uncertainty on the status of these SPAs, we see the different Sevilla Platform of Actions initiatives as our responsibility as partners who have supported them to take them forward and make sure that we're connecting with all of the relevant processes so that when we come to the next follow-up point, we have something to show for. And in the case of the service providers, that we've been able to move the discussion forward and that we can bring that also to member state discussions in the follow-up process. So with those remarks, I'm really looking forward to listening to the experts here today, and thank you.
Thank you very much. And I will now hand the floor to Dr. Kita Kwanteyana Wefitoson, who is the Vice Chair of Transparency International.
Thank you, Jonathan, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure for us to welcome you to this session. I think the first words would be to thank, of course, the government of Norway and also NORAD and all our partners who are in the room and who helped organizing this event, because this is a pivotal moment for us FFD4 is not just about, trying to seek the ways for financing sustainable development, but also we need to find ways to protecting those investments and those funding from the devastative effects of corruption. And I do think we all know that now that we are standing 5 years to the SDGs, that corruption is impeding us potentially from achieving those goals, those human goals, those collective goals. And we have seen these devastative effects not only in the global south, corruption is also thriving, I would say, in the global north, and it's a collective disease that we need to uproot. And at Transparency International, we have been relentlessly fighting back despite the moving landscape, on geopolitical side, on the funding side, many threats in terms of civic space for anti-corruption defenders. It's not easy days for us. And we have seen that in many chapters across the globe. People are suffering, they are facing threats, but still we are standing still for integrity, transparency, and accountability, because these are essential for us to really strive for a real sustainable development. So that's the main message here that I'd like to carry. Development financing will not achieve its promise unless it is really accompanied by financial integrity, transparency, and accountability. And we need to put the words written in paper into practice. And we are very happy that some commitments have been taken across the years and decades. From Monterrey to Addis Abeba to here in Sevilla, anti-corruption has been put on the forefront of the efforts, but now we need to reinforce this commitment, because we have this feeling that in the last months, in the last times, there are some actors who are thinking that, yes, let's now put this corruption word into, into the sidelines of our conversations because we can do things the other way. That's not true. And this is now more than ever that we need to stand together in a multi-stakeholder approach, fostering collective action at all four fronts to tackle corruption in all of its, its devastative effects. So today I just wanted to emphasize three interlinked areas where it is urgent for us to tackle corruption. The first thing is around public financial management. And we know that it's essential for sustainable development. So corruption seeps through every stage of resource management, from procurement, project design, ultimately the delivery of services. We have seen schools, hospitals, public services devastated by corruption everywhere across the world. So we strongly support the calls in the commitment, the compromise for a whole of government approach, and urge an open by default standard. Budgets, procurement data, and public spending must be transparent, structured, and accessible, but that's not enough. Civil society has to be empowered and left free to operate, because that's an essential pillar of this sustainable development that we want to build together. If civil society is impeded from doing its watchdog role, its overseeing, its monitoring role, then this scenario won't work. That's just as simple as this. The second scenario, the second point that I wanted to take you through is about illicit financial flows, because this is a persistent still topic in everything that we are speaking of. And in particular, beneficial ownership remains something we need progress on. Despite the commitments, achievements are still missing, and it is our duty as government, civil society, everybody, policymakers, to commit more on that aspects. As we have shown in our Loophole Masters report, Africa alone loses tens of billions of dollars annually to IFFs. This is something which is fostered by global complicity, I will say. And this global complicity enables this loss of funds which leads to loss of lives who are supported by basic services once again. So it is loss of engagement also in productivity. So that's why we need to stand together and find ways to build a fair development finance system which is not based on the foundations of secrecy. This system has to be based on transparency and more integrity. The last point is about sovereign debt. This is a persistent threat as well, you know. This must no longer be the blind spot of governance reform. Some more measures have to be taken to tackle it. We commend the commitment in the outcome document to create a single global debt registry. This is a need, this is a must, but we have to go beyond that nonetheless, because we need to ensure meaningful civil society participation in it. We need to hear from the ground as well, and we need to ensure that the information is accessible, timely, and also edible by everybody. Because if the information is reserved to a few, then it won't work neither. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear anti-corruption fighters, now is the time for a bold commitment and a bold stand against corruption. As long as we don't put corruption in the top of the priorities, there won't be sustainable development. There will be development, of course, but at what price? This is the message that we would like to convey today. And we'd like to thank once again all of you who are relentlessly, tirelessly investing yourselves in this fight. We have the commitments, we have the regulations, now implementation is the key word. So we do count on you and on your support. And let me close by saying that corruption thrives silently. Corruption doesn't leave receipt. That's the problem with it. It's hard to prove, but it's there and we know it. It's sneaky. It thrives in exclusion, in secrecy. So to tackle it, let's shine a light on everything. And each and every one of us can do that. We can bring that light, shine that light on what is wrong. And we have to keep holding power into account for the common good. Thank you so much, and wishing you a fruitful session.
I will now ask our panelists to join us on this crowded podium for the second part. Thank you.
Sorry.
So while our panelists join us, I will maybe start introducing them as they join. Just find a chair whenever possible. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us in this panel. We are pleased to be joined by Mr. Saifullah Pana, Secretary Chief Advisor's Office of the Government of Bangladesh, Mr. Phil Stephens, Director of International Finance of the UK FCDO. For South Africa, we also have Mr. Edward Kiesewetter, Commissioner of the South Africa Revenue Services, joining us, as well as Myra on my right, the CEO of Transparency International, and finally, Ana Patricia Munoz, Executive Director of the International Budget Partnership. So really looking forward to hear from each of you in this panel. That will be definitely a rich discussion. If I may start with you, Mr. Pana. Bangladesh has been a vocal voice, as many of you have heard, in the FfD negotiations on a number of topics, of course, but this includes one aspect that was raised by Gieta in her opening remarks, illicit financial flows, but also asset recovery language, an issue that is important for, I think, all of us. So could you tell us a bit what is the significance of the Compromiso de Sevilla for low and middle income countries in terms of their efforts to prevent illicit finance, but also how do you see the next steps for the international cooperation on asset recovery? So these two aspects. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I congratulate all of panelists. Last July, our student fight for fascist last government and as well as anti-corruption. So our government, led by Professor Yunus, Nobel laureate, he is committed to fight against corruption. His four agenda is number one agenda is zero tolerance to corruption. So we are taking measures how to fight against corrupt people, how to recover the stolen money, and it's a long process. Our civil society is very much vibrant and outspoken to prevent corruption because earlier you said corruption widens the gap between poor and rich, and day by day it will be widened. So we need to combat corruption to reduce the gap. Our government, after sworn or taking the oath, they formed some reforms commission. Important is anti-corruption commission. How to prevent corruption and how to come back stolen money outside of our economy. And it is painful for us that our hard-earned money out of our boundary. So we are trying, and we need cooperation, all agencies, national, international, and others, how to recover our asset. But it is very tough. Last month, our chief advisor went England to at this regard, but it is tough to come back or send back the stolen money. However, we are processing in this way. Our government is only 11 months. So we are very much committed to prevent corruption, but we need help, all of our friends and all of our friends and others. So we are taking some actions, but it should be visible after some times. And our time is very low. We are here for only 11 months. Last government just left a fragile economy. Our balance of payment and other payment is now positive. So we are taking actions and we are in priority. But if we are not committed to prevent corruption, all our benefit should be in vain, and the benefit would be go outside of our boundary. So we are taking some action. Promote anti-money laundering framework and financial integrity system that are crucial in tracing and reclaiming stolen assets. Convene a regular ECOSOC forum of financial integrity, elevating transparency and asset recovery into a standing agenda item. Promote measures to eliminate safe havens, aggressive tax practice, and loopholes that create incentives for illicit financial flow. We are taking some points. First, international cooperation for asset recovery and transparency for fundamental. Bangladesh stands ready to engage in bilateral and multilateral platform for asset recovery. Second, strengthening domestic legal and institutional framework. We need to align national laws with UN Convention Against Corruption and other international agencies standard. We need to enhance the capacity of financial intelligence unit modernize our public financial management, tax and regulatory authorities, and integrate land and property register to reduce abuse. We are trying to making transparency public and accessible is important. Bangladesh support to creation of interoperable and publicly accessible beneficial ownership registry as envisioned in the outcome document. We are taking some measures, last August when our government came, then we have many problems. So we are priorities our problem. Now we are in a good condition, and nationally and internationally all are supported our interim government's policies. We are hope for bright future. We are ready to operate or engaged in free and fair election. We are always in free and fair, and we stand against corruption. So we need some cooperation from our friends. Thank you.
Thank you very much for it's very rich. To summarize it, but I understand that there is a number of references to asset recovery, which is of course important for Bangladesh. Also as a part of the UN Convention Against Corruption, with an entire chapter that can be leveraged to further your efforts in this regard, and the STAR initiative could be discussed maybe more in the Q&A. And also on BOT as well, I think it's important to really link the political messaging, which is very important, to some very concrete technical tools and that we have at our disposal. So maybe turning now to Mr. Stevens now, Director of International Finance at the CDO. So we just mentioned beneficial ownership registries. There are clear commitments in the outcome document on that. Also, the regulation of professional service providers, very interesting point to discuss, and a very important step for many member states. How do you see the compromises areas value for advancing, I would say, UK's both domestic and international efforts on tackling financial secrecy, but also maybe also looking forward even beyond 2025. We had the recent announcement by the Foreign Secretary of the UK Office Summit on financial crime. Do you see this summit as an opportunity to follow up on some of the specific commitments and maybe also the discussions that we had in Sevilla to implement and really concretize these commitments?
Great, thank you, and it's a real privilege to be here and talk about this really important issue. I've sat in so many meetings over the last 4 days, as I'm sure all of you have as well, where we've been talking about how to unlock more finance for developing countries, which we know is needed for development and climate. We talk about unlocking tax revenues, money from the private sector, new global levies, all sorts of things, insurance. But the reality is there's a huge amount of money leaking out of many countries right now. And as other speakers said earlier, Africa is estimated to lose about $90 billion every year to illicit financial flows. So we have to put a plug in that hole if we're going to achieve the ambitions we've got. I thought the Compromiso de Sevilla had some really important commitments in it, and it was a shame that not everyone signed up to the outcome document, but most countries did. And I think the real value actually was not as much in the outcome document, but actually in the conversations and engagement that it sparked, between countries around the world. Because actually, what it's done is it's shot a spotlight on the importance of fighting illicit finance for the reasons that I just set out. And my sense is now a very active conversation going on between government and civil society about how to address this. And really, if we're going to address this, information is key, as it is with many things. And clearly, when you share information on who really owns companies and assets, it allows governments to take better decisions on tax. It supports law enforcement, it empowers journalists, and it helps businesses to better manage their own risks. And of course, it also helps countries to raise more domestic revenues and unlock more finance, prevent finance from leaking out of their economies. So as the UK, we're incredibly supportive of what's in the document, and very strongly support the beneficial ownership registries as a big step forward, and the idea of potentially even moving forward to a global registry at some point in the future, which we think will be a good idea. And we're using this momentum in the UK to improve our own systems, including our own corporate and overseas property registers. Through the Economic Crime Acts of 2022 and 2023, we've made real progress on that. But we know that as a global financial centre, we can't rest on our laurels. We have to stay vigilant, and that's why tackling illicit finance remains a big priority for the UK and for our Foreign Secretary. One thing that we've been doing on the international side is working with the African Development Bank to establish the African Beneficial Ownership Transparency Network, which we think is a great example of turning some of these commitments into action. So the idea of this network is basically that African countries can share their own experiences with each other and learn from each other as they pursue some of these important transparency reforms. And Zambia was the host of the most recent meeting, and there were agreements there about working together on technical data such as sharing cross-border border data. So making real progress, and I think that's an important initiative that we'd love others to join and support. So look, I mean, it's a priority for the UK. It's the corruption and illicit finance does real damage to economies both around the world and to the UK, but we can't solve this alone. And that's why next year we're going to host an illicit finance summit in the UK, as the Foreign Secretary recently announced. That's not the only place, I think, to have this conversation. We've also got things like the UN Convention Against Corruption Conference taking place in Qatar in December. South Africa brilliantly has shown some real leadership on this issue as well in the G20, and there'll be some important conversations, no doubt, in their leaders' conference later this year and various other meetings up to them. The technical discussions at the FATF and the OECD are also incredibly important, but we hope that this summit will be able to add value as well and really draw political attention to this important issue. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Phil, for this intervention to addressing our delegate from South Africa, Edward Kiseveter. Because we were just mentioning the G20, of course, it's not the only incapacity of the role of South Africa, but of course it has been steering the wheel both globally and regionally on some of these key topics. I would like to hear a bit your thoughts about, also because of your different hats, right? Not just working on corruption, but also on tax matters. What is the position and the way South Africa is looking at how we can link these discussions that we had this week with all the fora that Phil mentioned on the G20 and other platforms that South Africa uses to work on corruption?
Thank you. I'm not sure whether it's steering or stirring, but I guess you do a bit of both. So I'm here in my capacity as ATAF chair as well as Commissioner of South African Revenue Service. But I'm also here as an activist for URM. And we ensured that, in fact, within our G20 presidency this year, there's a very clear track of work with focus on domestic resource optimization. A lot of what happened over the week is about sustainable fiscal integrity. And I'm going to just mention 4 things that have to be managed as a system. Otherwise, you're just rearranging chairs on the Titanic. The first is obviously, thank you. The first is obviously what money is for. And here I think governments often fail at selecting the right priorities on which to spend money. In South Africa, for example, because of our history, but also we have to take some of the accountability, we still spend 22 cents on every dollar to service debt, or 21 cents. We have to spend about 61 cents on social expenditure. And so we need to think about how do we build productive capacity, how do we build sustainable economic and productive capacity that will broaden our tax base, that will increase for a sustainable period of revenue. But the second issue is the quality of that spend. So it's not how much you spend on education and health, but it's what you get for it. And again, there, I think we can all look to the better examples in the world as far as that's concerned. Which then brings me to domestic resource mobilization and I find governments, and again, South Africa is not the only one, have a poor orientation at how to view revenue authorities as investment centers rather than treating them as cost centers. And when there's austerity, then equally revenue authorities get money taken away from them. It's a short-term trying to manage the fiscal balance with severe long-term consequences. And if you do those three right, prioritize spend, ensure quality spend, raise domestic resources, then you will reduce the quantum of debt required, and then you can argue for a lower cost of debt. And that for me is the issue. So I want to just spend a few minutes on the role of AI, because I believe that at the rate of change, if we only rely on manual systems and processes and people, we will not win the war in any endeavor, but specifically not for the fight against tax, customs, and financial crime. So let me share with you some things that we are doing. We've made significant strides with the deployment of technology and AI to combat tax crime, financial flows, and trade. So we've done a few things. Firstly, we have dedicated capacity to deal with tax syndicated crime, because sadly, these crime events are enabled by professional, public, and other partners. And I'll come back to that. We have focused a strong voluntary compliance thrust of providing excellent service. So in South Africa, if you submit your return electronically, you will get an assessment outcome in under 5 seconds. You will get, if you're not selected for audit, you will have your refund paid into your bank account in under 72 hours. Now, to do that, we couldn't do it manually. So we've built significant computational capability to do a tax assessment, and then put behind that fraud risk detection technology to detect impermissible or fraudulent refunds. Our overall compliance program last year delivered an additional $18.5 billion to our revenue, which is about 12 to 15% of our overall revenue collection. Within that, we prevented the outflow of impermissible and fraudulent refunds of about $5.5 billion. So there's a strong case for a deeper, more accelerated investment to use predictive modeling, risk profiling. So we do our entire risk profiling and case selection using only AI. And then we do some manual profiling after we have selected the cases. And in the case of more complex matters, you need to then make a call because ultimately you must direct resources to the most highest yield instances. So in terms of the use of AI algorithms, we've discovered, for example, 57,000 taxpayers who have economic activities over R1 million, but are not registered for tax. About 45,000 taxpayers who are below the threshold if you look at their declared income, but if you look at their wealth, actually have significant health. In terms of specifically combating illicit flows, we have unwound a significant tobacco and gold money laundering scheme that required us to work through 60 terabytes of data. You can work out how many Netflix movies you can watch with that data. But it took us 3 years. And now by building AI, we can work through it so much faster. And sadly, and I'll pause there for a moment and can come back to some more examples, crime is enabled by multiple players. I think that's the message I want to leave you with, including men and women who work in suits, right? So we see senior government officials on a political and administrative side that enable crime. We see financial services, banks, professional firms, all of them have been caught up in state capture and in crime. And unless we approach it from a systematic approach as opposed to transactional, they will just find the weakest link in the system. And as my colleague said earlier, will continue to thrive, or as we know, that corruption thrives when good men and women remain silent. So we are an activist, we won't remain silent, and we say stuff that may even be career limiting. Thank you.
Thank you so much also to add in some concrete examples to the conversation, because I think the audience needs to hear them. And of course, yeah, the role of AI is still being explored by many countries, but there is a lot to do in many key areas of prevention of corruption. When also looking at public procurement, many conflicts of interest could be prevented through a use of more automated systems, and and also linking it to some managements of the beneficial ownership registry. So I mean, it's almost endless. But thank you for raising that, and also for bringing the conversation. I would call them enablers, but in a wider understanding that we usually hear in this policy conversation, where we usually refer to people in the private sector, but really addressing the different parts of the scenario. And that's why I also feel like we should always combine the systemic approach to corruption to the individual. Trying to deter individuals is not enough. When you work as you are doing in South Africa on systems, then you're basically putting the jam further away from the head, right? So thank you for this, and now we're going to hear from Mayra. We heard already from Toril in her opening remarks the importance of the cross-cutting aspects of corruption being really highlighted again, maybe even more strongly than Addis, definitely. I think there was a bit of back and forth in negotiations, so it's really excellent that it stayed. And of course, Transparency International has pushed for this language also to be there. So based on your initial ambitions, and now looking at the final Compromiso de Sevilla, how do you see it as fitting the global anti-corruption efforts that you want to see?
You're going to move your mic closer. I'm loud, but maybe not that loud. Hi everyone. Good afternoon. It's great to be here. Great to see the room full, and great also, to come after a couple of months or years of hard work from colleagues and partners to see some, I think, relatively strong language in the final document. I had been debating with myself yesterday whether I wanted to start this conversation in a negative or in a positive note, but in the hope that you function like me, like if you get mad, this gives you motivation to do something and talk about how to do things. I'm going to start with the negative. So when we as we met, we're meeting here in Sevilla, and I agree with the comments that were made that with the compromiso being agreed in the first date, we moved quickly to talk about implementation, which is great. But something else happened. That was the US government, which was the one who dropped, as mentioned, also made an announcement, which I think many of you probably saw, 1st of July, making foreign aid great again is the title of their announcement, which, as many of you can expect, confirms that US aid will no longer exist and brings some evidence, what they think is evidence, of why foreign aid hasn't worked in the past and why everything that we are discussing here makes no sense, basically. But I think one thing which for me was quite striking, and I wanted to bring here as a reflection, is one of the things that they mention as evidence of years of support of the US government to many countries not working, is that, and I'm going to quote, countries that benefit the most from our generosity usually fail to reciprocate. In 2023, sub-Saharan African nations voted with the US only 29% of the time on essential resolutions at the UN, despite receiving 165 billion since 1991. So I think if that's the expectation of what foreign agency, that's what they expected foreign agents to deliver, I'm very glad that they fail. And the reason why I thought I should bring this to the debate, because clearly we should not ignore that the fact that the US decides to leave, and the fact that the US clearly announced during this conference that they're not going to invest in sustainable development, they're not going to support actions related to sustainable development will have an impact, no, on the ability of all of us of achieving this. We shouldn't forget that they have been responsible for 40% of development assistance flowing worldwide. And I think this, in the middle of other challenges that we are facing, poverty, inequality, climate, conflict, is not something for us to underestimate, but it's something for us to consider when we plan next steps. And I think it should give us a sense of urgency, no, of where we want to go and how we will get there. And a lot has been said in the last days here about mobilizing resources from other stakeholders. And someone told me today there's 6,000 people from the private sector here. And I think this shows a little bit the direction we also think, or the people are thinking that we could be going. And that's where I think talking about anti-corruption becomes even more important. We're going to be, clearly the private sector sees development assistance as a business model, because otherwise 6,000 people will not come to this conference. And where there is a business model, there is an opportunity for corruption. So it's crucial that we discuss then what are the preventative measures, what are the mitigation measures that need to be in place to ensure that the money that is being mobilized will be well spent, allocated, and will support sustainable development. So very quickly, I think colleagues already mentioned here what are the ways in which corruption impacts financing for development. And I think it's great that the document brings clearly as a cross-cutting issue. So it direct impacts the amount of public resource available. And here, obviously, we talked about illicit financial flows already. We talked about that already. But I want to bring one other element, which is also related to men, usually men actually, in suit, which is lobbying. Because what we have seen in many countries, attempts of, for example, reforming tax regimes to have more progressive tax regimes are being stopped thanks to powerful lobbying of very narrow interest groups. So I think this is also related to corruption. It is something we shouldn't forget. Then there is, of course, the allocation of resources, and you were mentioning the what, no? How you make decisions of what should be invested in. And here again, no? If we have if we mobilize more resources, but these resources are allocated in a way that benefits just a few, then we're going to be failing again. And here again, lobbying, political party funding, conflicts of interest, all of this play a role in decisions of how public funds should be allocated. And then you have, of course, the expenditure side. Public procurement is really important, how we ensure service delivery, and I think colleagues already cover that. So if I still have time, do I still have time? I want to talk just about two things, which is the specifics of the document, because in addition to the mainstreaming, we mentioned here a couple of concrete things that the document cover. And I think two of them are particularly relevant and were mentioned, which is beneficial ownership transparency and professional service providers, enablers, how we often call them. And why I think they are important and why I think it's particularly important that are mentioned in this document is because of transnational element. Those are two issues where we cannot leave to countries in the global south to resolve, as many of the things in the development agenda. Those are issues where we require action everywhere. So I think my colleague can mention a research we did. We looked at 78 cases from Africa of illicit financial flows, and we found 3.7 billion in assets. 88% of those assets were not where corruption happened. They were elsewhere. So we're talking about companies, mostly in the British Virgin Islands, in Panama and Seychelles, real estate in France, UK, UAE, and the US, bank accounts in Hong Kong, Switzerland, UK, UAE, and US. So that's where we also need action to happen. And just to finalize, when we talk about professional enablers, it is the same. In 88% of the case we analyze, the person in suit was not in the country where corruption happened. The person in suit was based elsewhere, and what is worse, very often selling a service yet from another country, making regulation and supervision a lot more difficult. Thank you. Sorry.
I think some of us shouldn't be threatened by the fact that we are men in suit, but another kind of threat is bureaucrats, maybe sometimes more dangerous. So yeah, thank you for. I think two things I would take from the very wide messaging is the importance of partnerships as well, because many of the topics that you raised require to utilize the different networks that we all have, the different funds of expertise, different regions that we cover as well, and so that's also linking up with the cusp. Another point I wanted to make, I forgot, so I will get back to you maybe during the Q&A. Then we have our last panelist, Anna, for international budget partnerships. Anna, I have seen you very busy this week, and I think there was a number of events that you covered, and really around budget transparency, citizen participation. So these are points that we have started to talk about, especially citizen participation, but maybe more generally from your perspective, how do you think the compromiso is going to help set count development funds, basically, because this is a really important point for prevention. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation and for bringing us all together in the preparation for this panel and also here. And I have to say, you get extra points for wearing suits in 45 degrees. I just don't know how you do it. I'll just never criticize someone wearing suits. It's very impressive. I've been sweating without having a suit. So this is the last day, and I think it's my last panel. And so I think I need to say, some of you have already mentioned, is that inequality continues to be the issue of our times. And inequality is created many times, most of the time, intentionally, by exclusionary, racist, discriminatory policies. And it's deepened, maintained, sustained by corruption. And so those things are interlinked. It's a good point, Maria, about are we positive or negative, optimistic or pessimistic? I guess living today, I am more optimistic because multilateralism is still alive. We didn't know what was going to happen. The Civil Society Forum didn't have a location, a venue, I think 5 days before. And there's still a lot of engagement between civil society organizations, maybe more a virtue of civil society than anything else, but it shows resiliency. So in terms of the question of where the Compromiso Sevilla leaves us, I would like to mention three things, three hooks, three places where, at least for the international budget partnership, is important to continue to work in partnership. And then maybe a fourth point about how we make it happen. So the first one is about the explicit mention, and we heard it from the first panel, of the importance of public financial management, the explicit mention in the document at 27B of the importance of budget transparency and accountability. So it's mentioned, but what does that really mean? And here I would like to point to three sub-themes there. Some concerns that we have in having already built or working in building a movement of using budgets as a social tool for advocacy, that unfortunately now is leaving behind a lot of off-budget funds. So we can work on budget transparency, but a lot of debt is not in the budget. Climate finance is many times left out of the budget. The great enthusiasm about the private sector being here, involved in finance, is that in the budget? Is ODA in the budget? So it's not enough to ask for budget transparency. We need to broaden the definition about what's there. The second point is about the unfortunate decreasing role of parliaments in the oversight of the budget. Our latest survey, we implement the Open Budget Survey in 125 countries, shows that there was a big dip during COVID, and that trend has not improved, actually has gotten worse. We find that a fifth, 21% of countries, the legislators did not approve the budget or approved it late. I mean, that's the bare minimum that you want. So something very concerning there as well. And the last point on the budget transparency is about where participation is. We unfortunately find, and I love that it's been mentioned, the expenditure side, because that's where really what matters for people's lives. So unfortunately, we see very low participation with the line ministry. So there's more opportunities of participation with the finance ministry, at least on paper. The mechanisms are there, but with the line ministries, with sectorial ministries, way lower. Only 30% have opportunities of participation. So some food of thought. So that's on the budget transparency. The second point that has already been mentioned is on debt accountability. It's music to our ears that we're talking about debt accountability, and that needs to happen at all levels. Unfortunately, what we see, I guess is also an opportunity, domestic debt accountability is not considered as much. In a recent scoping paper that we did in conjunction with DFI, we found things like, for example, you've heard me say this before, some documents on debt sustainability in Uruguay is in South America, are written in English. And in Uruguay, the main language is Spanish. So that is just an example of who are we working for? Who is transparency for? That is affecting people in country, mostly communities that have been marginalized. And there's not even information targeted to communities, let alone other organizations. And then the complexity becomes even more strange, which is in the debt, are we counting state-owned enterprise? Do we have accountability on that? Do we have accountability on accruals and contingent liabilities? In the Open Budget Survey, we find that about 46% of countries do not provide information on whether the public debt is internal or external. I mean, that's the most basic thing you want to have. So we do need to get back to the basics. The third point, which I also think is a great, again, opportunity to continue to engage, and we heard from Toriel already, is tax. There are some things that I wish were more explicitly mentioned, like tax expenditures, which is nothing else than the incentives, the discounts that governments give, sometimes for good reasons, but sometimes in a study that I did in Ecuador, there were some tax expenditures or benefits that benefited 3 or 4 firms that created maybe 80 employments. What kind of special treatment should these organizations have? And so for the last point, before I get there, because I know it's getting late, I love, if you allow me, to do a show of hands, only if you feel comfortable with, just to see who we are talking to. So if you wouldn't mind raising your hand if you come from the private sector. It doesn't matter if you wear suits. Private sector. So thank you for representing the entire private sector of the world. Thank you for being here. Civil society. Nice, civil society. And because we don't want civil society to be speaking only to civil society, government. Not bad. Multilaterals. Thank you for representing the entire multilateral system today. Other development institutions. Good, I think we actually, TI, congratulations, you have an excellent mix. But this is what's important. And so the last thing I want to say is, how do we make this work? And I have a lot of notes here, but maybe let's just say 2 things. This is about power and reshifting who makes the decision. It's about demystifying what are the rooms that civil society can be in. It's about recognizing and valuing data that is generated by communities and not just by statistical organizations, as important as they are. It's about building ecosystems. So with that, I have no idea how much time.
It's very telling that we upload each panelist after, these are not statements, but I think they're strong enough to be uploaded every time.
I was wondering if they uploaded everyone except me. That would have been
yes. But thank you, Anna. And one thing I wanted to mention is that a kind of silent actor that you didn't mention, but is of course everywhere in the kind of work that you do is parliaments. We just had, I believe, a few days ago, the International Days of Parliament. So of course, it's also about the relationship between citizens and the parliaments and other oversight bodies. And I also remember the question or the remark I had also for Mayra before. it's also about the outcome document. Many of us have been scrutinizing this draft and then the outcome document very carefully, looking at every single comma. But the tendency that comes from this kind of really strong scrutiny is that we may feel like this is the scope. This is not a frame. This is a commitment. This is a threshold of what member states have committed to. But everything that is mentioned as optional or even silent in the text doesn't prevent absolutely no stakeholders to work together to go beyond. So that works for work on budget and transparency and public participation, but also for many others. And in this regard, we have 191 parties to the UNCAC, and we have several standards which are mandatory in this regard on public participation, on transparency of decision making, including when it comes to financial management. So just to close this, I think we have a bit less than half an hour, and we're supposed to have a session to open with the panel, but we also have a great audience, so let's not lose the opportunity for different crowds to have a proper dialogue. But maybe just to open at least with one general question with you among the panelists, if you have any other points that we didn't raise. I understand that two of you mentioned climate finance as being something that has been discussed in a number of events. We had at least 3 partners in this event that were together with us in the Summit for the Future, working on corruption risk related to climate financing. But if there is anything that you think is not in the Sevilla compromise, or that you think should be voiced, is there anything that you would like to talk about? Yes, please, Ed.
Yeah, thank you. I think so. Domestic resource mobilization is more than just revenue administration. So there's definitely a need for building institutional integrity and capability across the whole of government. So SARS relies on the investigative capacity of priority crimes. We rely on successful prosecutions so that people can be held to account. So I think strengthening institutional capacity is itself a deep undertaking that should not be compromised. No matter what we put in documents, ultimately, it's about execution. And then the second is, we speak about the whole of government, but also the whole of society approach. Because wherever there is a bribe received, someone is paying the bribe. And so corruption cannot be dealt with by only focusing on governments and on criminals. You have to zoom out and look at the softer issues of culture. Why is it that Nordic culture have higher levels of civil obedience and compliance than many countries in the global south, for example? I don't want to pick on a country. And I'm not speaking of oppressive regimes where people are maliciously compliant. I'm talking about building a societal culture where virtue is embraced as part of the DNA. I don't think we spend enough time understanding the human and social dimension of environments that nurtures and causes crime to thrive.
Thank you. Ed, anything to add? Maybe we can open the floor then. I think we have one hand and then yes. So if we could help, someone could. Do we have a microphone? No. Okay, maybe starting with Ian, because I know that he can speak loud. So if I can put you on the spot.
Yeah, I'll speak loud. Ian Gary, I'm the executive director of the Financial Accountability and Corporate Transparency, or FACT Coalition. For my sins, I'm based in the United States, working on illicit finance and anti-corruption issues. As the panel has noted, the U.S. left the financing for development process, but the impact of the U.S. in implementation of the financing for development process will still be felt. The fact of the matter is that in the last few months, the U.S. has halted enforcement of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. It has halted enforcement of the Corporate Transparency Act, which is our beneficial ownership law. It has disbanded task forces like the Klepto Capture Task Force, meant to go after the proceeds of kleptocracy. And it has reassigned lawyers working on white-collar crime to immigration issues. So my question to the panel is, in that context, the US is moving from a dirty money destination, perhaps by default, to a dirty money destination by design. That could greatly undermine the implementation of the financing for development ambitions. And I'd like to hear from the panel what you think of that impact and what could be done, particularly, supporting groups like ours from the outside to try to get the US back on the right side when it comes to illicit finance, including, for example, the upcoming evaluation of the US by the Financial Action Task Force. My second question is for Phil. The UK overseas territories just missed a deadline for establishing beneficial ownership registries. Jurisdictions like the British Virgin Islands. What can be done between now and the UK hosting an illicit finance summit to compel those jurisdictions to put in place beneficial ownership registries? Thanks.
Thank you. Maybe we can take a couple of questions before moving to the floor. Thank you.
If you could introduce yourself, thank you.
Hello, I'm Luc Nesna. I'm the policy coordinator of the Publish What You Pay network, working on the multifaceted policies around resource justice. My first question is for, sorry, I arrived late, the man without a suit. When I arrived, it appeared that you were talking about sound public finance management and debt distress. My question is about scale macroeconomically, because in the Sevilla declaration, the UN debt process potentiality wasn't mentioned. There was a protest earlier. And I don't see how the soundest public finance management can ever cope with the debt distress of global south countries. And it branches to what we're saying about tax evasion by syndicated crime, because the last panelist was talking about tax exemptions. We didn't go over profit shifting, but similarly, truly criminal tax evasion is minor compared to aggressive tax optimization. And finally, your point on AI anti-corruption was very interesting. However, sorry for the however, the Trump-Musk duo, well, dead duo, shows that AI companies and tech bros are essentially above the rule of law now. So even if the AI can help us doing anti-corruption, the people owning the AI are above the law. All of this is linked, because our last panelist was saying that corruption produces inequality. I go one step further and I say that inequality produces corruption. Power concentration produces corruption. And today, economical, financial, and political power is increasingly concentrated. So my only real question is that power is never given, it's taken. And so is there any anti-corruption, illicit finance, financial flows, fights, like all of those subjects led by the Global South regions who actually need to benefit from this? Because like I'm French, Macron will not lead this, ever. He's benefiting from it. So maybe it's an approach by the panel, I arrived very late. I'm sorry if you have already talked about this.
Maybe we should start with responding to these questions. If there are any reactions? Okay, so maybe two more questions, please. No interest. Introductions and straight to the point. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Beauty Mefanate, the Executive Secretary for the Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition. My question has to do with the issue of campaign finance and the lack of regulation in most countries and its effects on corruption. And I think that the panel was not able to do that, given the fact that we have cost of election going up, and we also have the private sector becoming the conduits for financing this campaign, and then they are rewarded when these governments come into power. So I want to hear from the panel, what are your perspectives around campaign finance? Yeah. And sorry, with the only man not in suit. Yes. So I wanted to find out, I like what you shared, but if you could also talk about the role of internal auditing in all that, I think that would also be great for us to hear. Thank you.
You can call him Ed now. Everyone knows him. Maybe one last question from this one.
Thank you. My question goes to our friend from the UK.
Could you introduce yourself, please?
My name is David Ugolo. I'm the Executive Director of African Network for Environment and Economic Justice, an NGO based in Nigeria. I'm more particular about, all this big thing we talk about at the international level. What does it mean to the victim of corruption? And that brings me to our lessons from the UK. And I'm sure that you're familiar with the repatriation of the Ibori loot back to the UK. And I'm happy that the UK is planning for another international conference on illicit financial flow. Do you see how the victim, because when the UK government, particularly against the background that the US is pulling out, a role for the UK government to demonstrate that the voice of the victim will play a major role, and particularly with regard to the Ibori loot that is going the process of being repatriated back to Nigeria. How will it get to the people who are really the victim, like the Delta State, which is a sub-regional government? They are not always in the table when negotiation is taking place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So maybe we can start with the responses, starting with Ed, please.
Yeah, I stopped wearing suits about 10 years ago. I couldn't find a tie that fitted me. I love the way you think, so I'll come to you. But I think just on the question about how you keep the US at the table is get through the politics and talk to real people. Last week, South Africa, who is accused of white genocide and being laughed out of the White House, signed an MRA, a AEO for authorized economic operators. We've been working on it for about 2 years. We signed a mutual recognition agreement with the US at the level of customs head to customs head. And so I believe that when you are, the first objective is that realize we're still dealing with people. Often people are forced to read out statements that was written for them, or that'll cost them their job if they don't read it. And get to the substance of the issues and just don't be distracted by the politics. I'm not saying the politics is inconsequential, but a lot of good work still happens business to business, institution to institution. And the big thing is don't leave the table. For me, that's the only advice. In terms of balancing debt with the other issues, I'm a systems thinker. So I don't think one versus the other. It's not the tyranny of the or, it's the genius of the and. So it's both. We have to look at the cost of debt, and often rating agencies are biased towards countries that they've never visited or don't understand. And so that is an issue. The cost of debt is an important issue. But for me, if you don't look at a longer term approach to reduce the reliance on debt, which is my other three things, then you'll never ever, no matter if debt is ridiculously cheap, it'll still be a scavenger. You can't spend hard-earned money on just keeping the wolves away from the door. On AI owners, look, you've got to accept that AI is inevitable. And the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. It ended because other things more valuable was invented, right? So I am a deployer of AI, not a creator of AI, and therefore I hold in my hand, obviously there's biases, but I hold in my hand the purpose to which AI should be served, and I can unpack that. I think you and I will have a good bottle of red wine and discuss how we can deploy AI to serve a good purpose. And then just the role of internal audit. For me, the sad thing about this is internal audit, like many other issues, are compliance-driven and not risk-driven. And so we tick the box to comply, and in the process, we have a minimalist approach. In South Africa, none of the regulations for procurement, none of the fact that we have an internal audit structure, 4 lines of defense, prevented wholesale corruption in procurement, because you will find a way to break the rules if that's your intent. So for me, it is about shifting a compliance mindset towards an overall systemic risk mindset.
Thank you very much, Ed. Maybe Theo, would you like to respond?
Yeah, thanks. There are a couple of questions directed towards me. So, firstly, on the overseas territories and crown dependence, I mean, look, what I can say is the UK government's made it very clear from day one, when they came in almost a year ago to the day, that tackling illicit finance is a priority for them. Foreign Secretary, my minister, has very personally taken up the issue of registers of beneficial ownership with a lot of energy, and we're monitoring the implementation of the agreements that were made last November by the overseas territories very, very carefully. So that's what I'll say on that question for now. On the other question, the voice of people who are impacted and countries that are impacted by these sorts of things is incredibly important. I think the UK has been very clear this week in a number of different fora that we want to see more voice of particularly lower income and vulnerable countries throughout the international system. I think we're one of the countries that's most loudly advocating for more voice for low income and vulnerable countries at the World Bank, and we're advocating that very strongly through the IBRD shareholder review. We're doing the same at the IMF. We've been advocating throughout the debt negotiations, despite some of the sort of quite bizarre allegations that have been in the papers over the last couple of days about how we handled the conversation around debt. The reality is, those of you that are in the room know that we were advocating for measures to increase the voice, particularly of African countries in the debt architecture, and we're very supportive of the debtors club that's been created. I was talking to some partners about that earlier, and I think that as we think about an illicit finance summit next year, the voice of civil society organisations in affected countries will be an important part of the design of that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Phil. And maybe, Mary, if you'd like to...
Just very quickly on the US. Just on the question on the US, on the campaign finance, and a comment on AI. So on the US, I don't think it's an easy position to be in. I see 2 types of pressure that we as civil society can try to put. One is the focus on the multilateral bodies and the review process that exist. In particular, as you mentioned, the Financial Action Task Force. We did send a letter together with Transparency International US to the Financial Action Task Force, asking them to ask questions to the US on a couple of actions that were announced recently and the impact this would have in the ability of the US to tackle anti-money laundering, but also the ability of other countries to tackle anti-money laundering. And they actually just responded to our letter last week, that the review process will be anticipated, and it started already in July. So yeah, I would encourage civil society organizations and those that are interested to submit information to feed into the review process to ensure that they're looking at the critical issues and that they also have information coming from other sources, not only the government. And the second thing I think we can do is put more pressure on other countries to step up, because I think this can also help when we're talking about cross-border corruption cases And there are two recent initiatives that go in this direction, which as a society we should be promoting and we should be encouraging other governments to join. So the UK, France, and Switzerland announced a new task force, prosectorial task force, focusing on cross-border corruption, which I think is a very good step forward. And interesting as well, like New Zealand announced that they're creating a hotline for people to denounce specifically foreign bribery, which I think also sends a strong signal of intention of pursuing this type of crimes. And then just very quickly on campaign finance, I agree this is a critical issue. That's something that we at Transparency International have been pushing a lot. We adopted new policy position last year that takes into account also the role of technology, social platforms, and so on in particular during elections. And we are pushing for a resolution at the next COSP, so happy to chat. And just on AI, I would also encourage you, we have been talking a lot about AI and anti-corruption, but we at TI also just worked on a paper that looks at the corrupt use of AI. And what are the things that when we are deploying AI systems, we need to pay attention to ensure that they're not contributing to further inequality, discrimination, and so on. So encourage you to also have a look.
Thank you very much. I think we may be a bit tight on efficiently to have more questions. So do we have other reactions from the panel, or otherwise I think we can move to the conclusion. If I could add, because I think a lot has been said and I spoke it enough. There would be two stakeholders that we didn't mention, but of course, especially for people who don't follow necessarily here the discussion on anti-corruption. The youth is usually also very important to and important, and I would say increasingly actors of the discussions on how to prevent and fight corruption. And this is also in the context of the Conference of the State Parties to the UN Convention Against Corruption. So we have very interesting and dynamic networks of youth around the globe, working, I'm sure, with TI, with UNODC, with any stakeholders in the room. So that one point I wanted to make. Also, in the outcome document, there was this very clear commitment, not just to have civil society, but also the media being involved because they play such an important role. So also to keep in mind. And before moving to the closing remarks, I also wanted to encourage you, all of you, especially if you are in this room as really focusing on financing for development, but not being part of what we call the anti-corruption community, please reach out, please get involved and look at what is being done. You can have more information on intergovernmental processes on the website of UNODC, also on the work of TI and any other very impressive list of partners that we had today. This work does not belong to the anti-corruption community, so really there is a lot that could be done from your experience and angle, also at the country and regional level, and maybe that will make you want also to register and come for the COSP in Qatar this December as well. So thank you very much.
One thing.
Yes.
One thing, just in one sentence.
One sentence.
One sentence, which is maybe two words: gender and intersectionality. I think we cannot forget the disproportionate effects that all of this has in women and girls, for example. And that means that all of us, even if we work in very complex technical aspects, need to be intentional about including civil society organizations, grassroots, led by women, so that they're not participating or being consulted only. They are engaged, they are transforming, they are politically active in this process.
Thank you very much. And with this, I thank our panel for the very interesting conversation. Thank you. So Anna, maybe if you please don't you want to give your seat, because Anna is going to, from UNCA Coalition, is going to give concluding remarks now. And thank you.
Good afternoon. I am really sorry that you have to stay for 4 more minutes, but I'll try to be very brief. I'll try to be brief. I first of all want to thank Transparency International for convening this session. thank the panelists for very insightful comments and, of course, your comments from the public as well. My name is Ana Revuelta. I represent the UNCAC Coalition. We are a global civil society network with around 400 organizations from all over the world, and our commitment is to advance the implementation and the monitoring of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. You have covered a lot of ground, and I will not at all attempt to summarize it, but I just want to highlight a few key words because I think that they can leave us with a state of mind for when we leave this room. Anti-corruption as cross-cutting, implementation, protecting funds for development, regulation, accountability, transparency, information, data and access to this data. Who accesses data? Can civil society access data to be useful? Cooperation ecosystem. We have to be together in the fight against corruption, using the existing fora, processes and bodies. The fight against corruption is inseparable from the fight for a more just and equitable world, a world where human rights are fulfilled. This is the way we really see it. So this is why anti-corruption is crucial in the financing for development agenda, and you have all the panelists have highlighted that. So we obviously appreciate how the outcome document of the conference also acknowledges some of the elements that are central to safeguarding funds that are connected to anti-corruption. And we also have, and we could move, as you already indicated as well, beyond the outcome document with a few, well, many actually, initiatives in the Sevilla platform for action, I think how it's called. And I think that the value of these initiatives is that you propose them together so that they are mostly joint initiatives and they invited to partnerships because it's not about each of us doing or keeping what we already do on our individual and small scale, but really on working together. And my hope really is that most of these initiatives survive and grow and thrive and really have impact on the ground. I really hope for that and call for that. So I will end with just a call for action. As in civil society, we usually like to end a call for action to governments, but really to all of us who care about anti-corruption. And I think that in this moment that is very challenging at national level in many places, but also internationally, as you have commented, I think we really can turn ourselves to what is already agreed internationally. We have international tools and agreements, and among which, of course, the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. And the three areas of actions that I want to highlight, and this is really like 3 areas for work that I invite you to work on in the next months. One of them is the UNCAC Conference of the States Parties resolutions. Those resolutions that are agreed by governments every 2 years are guidance on how to improve in the implementation of the convention. And just to mention a few areas that the resolutions, the last ones approved in 2023 were about, it was about improving beneficial ownership transparency. It was about, for the first time at that level, recognizing the value of whistleblowers and the need to protect them. It's about public procurement. It's about also recognizing the societal aspects of corruption or affects the corruption on how it affects women and different sectors. And it's about also tackling organized crime or advancing the measurement of corruption. We are really lagging behind on this as well. So you can work on implementing those resolutions and share what you do, and also work on new areas for future resolutions that can be adopted in the next conference of the states parties that will be celebrated in December in Doha. So this year, in 5-6 months. So those areas can be environmental crime and corruption, they can be political finance, and they can be how we better supervise those professional service providers that enable the illicit financial flows. The second area where I think that we can work, and it's very important and it would really make a difference, is to improve the implementation review mechanism of the review mechanism on how we implement the UNCAC. And I think we really have a chance now. We have been working with review mechanism for 15 years, and now we have the chance to shape how the next, we call it the IRM, the implementation review mechanism, will look like. And it has to become more transparent, it has to become more agile and effective and more inclusive of civil society. And this is really vital, the inclusion of civil society, because there we will be able to really contribute to fight against corruption. And civil society is really my last point, because there's a wealth of expertise in civil society. You have mentioned the data, the standards that are developed by civil society. Governments can support civil society in many ways, and there are ways that are very easy, for example, and very concrete, including civil society representatives in governmental delegations when these negotiations take place, so that civil society can have their ears there. They will not speak on your behalf, and they will cost nothing, because we are just in your delegation to provide expertise and to listen. And of course, yes, implementing, so giving really support to civil society in many ways, but above all, facilitating access to information and creating an enabling environment for civil society. I will end with that. Let us continue and sustain this momentum until the next conference of the States Parties. I hope to see many of you there. Thank you.